Welcome to the weirdest animal reunion ever. Get ready for a wild ride through history's strangest creatures. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're talking about extinct animals so bizarre you'll think they're straight out of a cartoon. From the dodo to the saber-toothed cat and even a zebra that forgot its stripes, these real creatures are wilder than fiction. So hit that like button, subscribe, and let's jump into the wildest animal adventure ever. All right, let's kick things off with an animal everyone thinks they know. The dodo. We've all heard the phrase, dumb as a dodo, right? It's become a symbol for being a bit, well, clueless. But was it really? These birds lived on the island of Mauritius, a beautiful, isolated place with no natural predators. For centuries, they just waddled around, living their best life, completely unafraid. Can you imagine that? A life with no fear. So, when humans showed up in the 1500s, the dodos didn't run away. They probably walked right up to the sailors, curious and friendly like a little welcome wagon. And sadly, that trust was their downfall. The sailors, pigs, monkeys found these fearless, flightless birds were incredibly easy to hunt. It wasn't that the dodos were stupid. They were just naive to the dangers of the world. Now here's a fun little tidbit about their name. The word dodo is thought to come from the Portuguese word dudo, which means fool or simpleton. The sailors who first encountered them saw their fearlessness as foolishness, so they basically nicknamed them the foolish bird. They were just living peacefully in their own little paradise, and they get labeled a fool for being friendly. The dodos had evolved perfectly for their environment. They didn't need to fly, and they didn't need to be afraid. They were perfectly adapted until their environment was suddenly and drastically changed by our arrival. It's a powerful reminder of how fragile ecosystems can be and how quickly things can change. The last confirmed sighting of a dodo was in 1662. In less than a century of human contact, they were gone forever. Think about that for a second. An entire species wiped out, partly because we misunderstood their nature. They were about 3 feet tall, weighed around 20 pounds, and were related to pigeons and doves. Can you picture a giant, flightless pigeon? It's kind of a funny image, but also a poignant one. They were unique, and there was nothing else quite like them on the planet. Their story has become a cautionary tale. It's the poster child for extinction caused by humans. So the next time you hear someone use the phrase dumb as a dodo, you can share this story. You can tell them that the dodo wasn't dumb, it was just an innocent victim of circumstance. Okay, next up. We have a true icon of the Ice Age, a giant, furry, majestic creature that I think everyone wishes they could have seen in person. I'm talking about the woolly mammoth. These things were enormous. Imagine an elephant, but covered in a thick, shaggy coat of hair, with huge, curved tusks that could grow up to 15 feet long. They were the rock stars of the prehistoric plains, just strolling around like they owned the place. These magnificent beasts roamed across North America, Europe, Asia. That long, thick fur I mentioned, it was perfect for keeping them warm in the freezing cold. They had an outer layer of long guard hairs and a shorter, softer undercoat. It was like they were wearing a permanent, custom-made winter jacket. And those incredible tusks weren't just for show. They used them to fight off predators. They used them to sweep away snow, so they could find tasty grass and shrubs underneath. They were herbivores, gentle giants really, just munching on plants all day. They lived in herds, much like modern elephants do. They were incredibly important to their ecosystem. Their grazing habits helped maintain the grasslands, which supported a whole host of other animals. They were a keystone species. The whole environment kind of depended on them. When they disappeared, everything changed. So why did they go extinct? It's a combination of things, really. The climate started to warm up at the end of the Ice Age, which changed their habitat dramatically. The vast grassy plains they relied on started to shrink and were replaced by forests. At the same time, early humans were becoming very skilled hunters. A mammoth could provide a lot of food, fur, ivory for tools and shelter. The pressure from both climate change and hunting was just too much. But here is where the story gets really, really interesting. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Their remains have been so well preserved in Siberian permafrost, scientists have been able to recover intact DNA. And now, some scientists are actually trying to bring the woolly mammoth back. All right, get ready for one of the most visually strange animals on our list. Have you ever seen something and thought, did the artist just run out of ink? That's kind of what you might think when you see a picture of the quagga. This animal is fascinating because it looked like a mashup of two different animals. It was a type of zebra, but it only had stripes on the front half of its body. Imagine this. From the head to about the middle of its back, it had bold, beautiful zebra stripes. But from the middle of its back to its tail, the stripes faded away into a plain, brownish, horse-like coat. Its legs were just a plain, creamy white. It literally looked like a creature that was half zebra and half horse. The quagga lived in the wild plains of South Africa. They were once incredibly numerous, roaming in huge herds. Their name, quagga, is actually an onomatopoeia, meant to imitate the animal's distinct call, which sounded something like quah-ha-ha. Sadly, their story is another one that ends with human interference. When European settlers arrived in South Africa, they saw the quaggas as competitors for grazing land for their livestock, sheep, cattle. So they hunted them relentlessly. They were hunted for their meat and for their unique hides. It was so systematic and so widespread that their numbers just plummeted. The last wild quagga was shot in the late 1870s. The very last quagga on Earth died in a zoo in Amsterdam in 1883. No one at the zoo even realized she was the last one. Her death wasn't even recorded until the next day. The world lost an entire unique species, and it barely even made a ripple at the time. Because it was found to be a subspecies of the plains zebra, its DNA is very similar. A group in South Africa, called the Quagga Project, started in 1987. They call these new animals Rau quaggas, and they've had some incredible success. They now have herds of these recreated quaggas roaming in reserves in South Africa. Okay, this next one is honestly one of my favorites because it's just so cool and so mysterious. We're talking about the Tasmanian tiger. Despite the name, it wasn't a tiger at all. Despite looking just like a dog or a wolf, it wasn't related to them either. This incredible creature was actually a marsupial, like a kangaroo or a koala. The female even had a pouch to carry her young. Its scientific name is thylacine, the largest carnivorous marsupial of modern times. Sandy, yellowish-brown coat, dark stripes across its back. The tiger nickname. Head of a wolf, stripes of a tiger, pouch of a kangaroo. Nature took the coolest parts and put them together. Lived in Tasmania, Australia, and New Guinea. But the most unbelievable thing was its jaw. This is going to blow your mind. It could open to almost 120 degrees. Can you picture that? Almost a straight line, twice as wide as a dog's mouth. An incredible adaptation. Scientists still debate its purpose. Maybe threat displays, to look intimidating. Sadly, a familiar story. European settlers arrived with sheep. They blamed thylacines for attacks. A bounty was placed. Hunted, trapped, poisoned. A government-sanctioned campaign to wipe them out. Last wild one shot in 1930. Benjamin, the last in captivity, died at Hobart Zoo in 1936. He died from exposure after being locked out overnight. But the mystery continues, declared extinct, but sightings persist. Thousands of unconfirmed reports. Let's move from the land to the sea for our next animal, a bird that has a very confusing legacy. I want you to meet the great auk. When you look at a picture of it, you're going to think one thing: penguin. It stood about 3 feet tall, black and white, couldn't fly, an expert swimmer. It looked like a penguin from the northern hemisphere. But here's the twist. It wasn't a penguin at all. It belonged to a different family. The auks, puffins, murreys. The great auk was the original penguin. The word penguin may come from Welsh penguin, whitehead. That likely referred to the white spots on the great auk's head. When explorers reached the southern hemisphere and saw similar birds, they called them penguins too. So modern penguins were named after the great auk. The great auk lived in the cold North Atlantic, Canada, northern United States, Greenland, Iceland, Scandinavia, the British Isles. They were powerful swimmers, using wings to fly underwater. On land, they were clumsy. Flightless, they nested only on remote rocky islands safe from predators. They gathered in massive colonies. Each pair laid a single precious egg each year. They depended entirely on those safe havens. That dependence was their doom. Get ready to meet a true gentle giant. Our next extinct animal is the Steller's sea cow, and it was massive. This marine mammal was related to modern manatees, dugongs, but it dwarfed them. It could grow up to 30 feet long and weigh as much as 10 tons. That's longer than a school bus and heavier than an African elephant. It was one of the largest mammals of the modern era, besides whales. The Steller's sea cow lived in the cold, shallow coastal waters of the Bering Sea, near the Commander Islands between Russia and Alaska. It was discovered by European science in a very dramatic way. 1741 Portrait of Georg Steller and shipwrecked sailors on Bering Island. While stranded there for nearly a year, he was the first and only scientist to ever study these incredible creatures in detail. Steller wrote that these animals were incredibly gentle and slow-moving. They were herbivores, spending their days floating in the shallows, munching on kelp, seagrass. They had no teeth. Instead, they had 2 large keratinous pads in their mouths for chewing. They were also very social, living in small family groups. Steller observed them showing affection for one another, even mourning their dead. They were so tame and slow that Steller and his crewmates could literally walk up to them in the shallow water. They showed no fear of humans. This, combined with the fact that they were huge and full of nutrient-rich blubber and meat, made them an incredibly easy target. Steller and his crew hunted them to survive their shipwreck ordeal, and their survival is what ultimately led to the sea cow's extinction. When the survivors of the expedition finally made it back to Russia, they brought with them stories of this enormous, easy-to-catch sea mammal and incredibly valuable sea otter pelts. This sparked a fur rush to the Commander Islands. Fur hunters, whalers, sealers. And for them, the Steller's sea cow was a perfect, ready-made food source that could sustain their crews for months. The hunting was relentless and incredibly wasteful. The sea cows were so large that a single one could feed a crew for a long time. Hunters would simply wade into the water, harpoon a sea cow, and drag it to shore. All right, let's talk about one of the most famous prehistoric predators of all time, the saber-toothed cat. Whenever you think of Ice Age animals, you probably picture a woolly mammoth and one of these fearsome felines. With those enormous, dagger-like canine teeth, they look like the ultimate killing machine. But there are a few things about this animal that might surprise you. First of all, and this is a big one, it wasn't a tiger. We often call it a saber-toothed tiger, but they weren't closely related to tigers or any modern cat. They belong to a completely different and now extinct subfamily of felines. The most famous species, Smilodon fatalis, was built more like a bear than a modern cat. Incredibly muscular and stocky with a short, bobbed tail. Those famous teeth are, of course, the main event. They could be up to 7 inches long. But they were surprisingly fragile, long and thin, like blades, and could easily snap if they hit bone. So, unlike a modern lion or tiger that suffocates prey, scientists believe the saber-toothed cat hunted differently. It used its powerful muscular body to wrestle large prey, bison, young mammoths, to the ground first. Once the prey was pinned and immobilized, it would deliver a quick, precise, stabbing bite to the soft throat or belly, using those giant canines to sever major blood vessels. Less of a bite, more of a surgical strike. Rapid blood loss, quick death, and the teeth stayed safe. A specialist hunter built for megafauna. Another fascinating thing from the fossils. They were likely social, living in groups like modern lions. How do we know? At the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, thousands of Smilodon fossils have been found. Many show healed injuries, broken bones, severe arthritis, injuries that would cripple a lone predator. A badly broken leg can't hunt. Surviving for months or years suggests packmates cared for them, sharing food with injured and old members. Not a solitary monster. Complex social structure and cooperation. Why did they go extinct around 10,000 years ago? Like the woolly mammoth, their fate tied to the end of the Ice Age. As the climate warmed, their large prey, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths began to die out. Their entire food source vanished. They were too specialized. Heavy, powerful bodies not built to chase smaller, faster animals. a victim of its own success. Adapted to giants, couldn't adapt when giants disappeared.